I dropped a length of green oak on my own boot last spring, and the only thing I have to blame is a knot I never learned to tie. I had a cheap ratchet strap holding a heavy timber up on the bench while I went to fetch a chisel, and that strap let go the way modern hardware always seems to, all at once and with no warning at all. Down came the oak. Up came a word my grandmother would not have cared for. I stood there rubbing my foot and thinking about a man I once knew, an old rigger named Tom Prewitt at the Essex Heritage Yard, who used to say that good rope talks to you before it ever betrays you. I always figured a strap was just a faster knot, and a knot was just a slower strap. That is what I believed, right up until Tom sat me down on an upturned bucket and showed me otherwise. Tom carried 15 working knots in his hands, the way you carry your own name, each one built to solve a single problem aboard a wooden ship, and I have wanted to hand them to you for a long time now. So, how does one plain coil of rope go from a heap on the shop floor to the one thing a whole crew will trust, with their lives in a rising gale? The answer is that a sailor never saw rope as one single thing. He saw a dozen tools hiding inside the same length of hemp, and he reached for the right one the way you reach for the right chisel, without even looking down. Keep half an eye out for number 12 as we go, because that one is barely a knot at all, and I promise we will circle back to why it mattered more than any pretty loop on this whole list. Let us start where every sailor started. Number 1, the bowline. If a working sailor could keep only one knot for the rest of his days, this is the one he would keep, and the old hands still call it the king of knots. It makes a fixed loop that will not slip smaller under load and will not jam shut so hard that you need a spike to dig it free again. You form a small bight, which is just a bend in the rope that does not cross over itself. Then you bring the working end, the short bit you actually tie with, up through and around the standing part, the long, quiet length that carries all the weight, and back down through the bight again. That is your loop, and it will not surprise you. This is the knot that held men on a bosun's chair 100 feet up a swaying mast, trusting their whole weight to 3 tucks of rope. I learned to trust it hauling a stubborn oak knee out of a wet ditch behind my shop, when every strap I owned had already given up. It held. Everything my grandfather ever told me about that knot turned out to be true. Number 2, the clove hitch, and this one is all about pure speed. When you need to make a line fast to a spar or a rail in a hurry, 2 quick turns and a tuck give you a hitch you can throw almost without looking at your own hands. Now, I will be honest with you, because Tom always was with me. It is not the knot you leave overnight under a hard and shifting pull, because it can work itself loose if the load keeps rolling one way and then the other. But for tying off a fender or lashing a batten to a post while your glue quietly sets, nothing lives in the hand faster. I reach for it in the shop most every week without a second thought. Number 3, the sheet bend. The old sailmakers down in the loft called it the Beckett bend, and here is the detail that even careful folks tend to miss. It is the one honest way to join 2 ropes of different thickness, and a plain square knot simply will not do that job without slipping when you least want it to. You lead the thinner line up through a bight in the thicker one, take it around behind, and tuck it back neatly under itself. The mismatch between the ropes is the entire point of the thing. It grips precisely because the 2 are not the same, and a mended fishing net or a lengthened tow line leaned its whole weight on that little bit of cleverness. Number 4, the reef knot. When a storm came up fast and the crew had to shorten sail before it tore, they gathered the loose belly of the canvas and tied it down with this, the flat square knot you already half know from your bootlaces. Right over left, and then left over right, and it lies down flat against the sailcloth, so it will not chafe a hole through in the night. Tie it careless, left over left, and you get a granny knot that slips and spills its load the moment the wind leans on it. You would think a knot that simple could never sink a ship. Get it backward on a reefed sail in a real blow, and it very nearly could, and more than once it very nearly did. Number 5, the rolling hitch. This is the quiet genius of the whole list, and it is the one I wish more woodworkers knew. When you need to grip along another rope, or along a spar that is already groaning under load, and grip it so hard that it cannot slide even a finger's width, This is the hitch that bites down and stays. Two turns that ride over the standing part, then a single hitch snugged above them. And here is the beautiful part. The harder you haul, the tighter it clamps itself. Riggers used it to take the killing strain off a jammed line so they could clear the fouled mess behind it without the whole rig coming down on their heads. I think of it every single time. A clamp in my shop will not quite reach where I need it. Number 6. The cleat hitch. Every boat afloat has cleats, those small horned pieces of bronze or hardwood bolted to the deck, and there is exactly one right way to belay a line to one. Belay being the old sailor's word for making a rope fast so that it cannot run away from you. A turn around the base to take the load, a figure of 8 laid across the two horns, and one locking turn on the very top. No more than that. The sailors who piled on 10 sloppy, panicked wraps were the same ones whose lines jammed solid at the one moment they needed them free. Done properly, this holds all day in a chop and casts off clean in a single second. If these first knots have already saved you a dropped board, there is far more of this old knowledge where they came from. I poured 30 years of it into Secrets of the Shipyard, 16 chapters on wooden tree nails, joints that only tighten as they age, glueless watertight faying, and keeping oak alive with pitch and tar. Scan the QR code on your screen and have a look. Number 7. The round turn and 2 half hitches. When you must make a line fast to a ring or a heavy post and then truly walk away and forget about it, this is your anchor point on dry land. The round turn, a full and patient wrap right around the ring, soaks up the first hard shock of the load before anything else has to. Then the 2 half hitches lock the standing part back onto itself so it cannot creep loose an inch overnight. It is plain, and it is deeply unglamorous, and it has quietly moored more small working craft down the centuries than any knot with a prouder name. Number 8. The anchor bend. The old fishermen called it the fisherman's bend, and this is how you tie a hawser, a rope as thick as your own wrist, directly to the iron of the anchor. It is a close cousin to the last knot, but you pass one extra turn through the ring before you finish it off, so that the endless, wet strain of a whole boat riding at anchor through the night will not shake it apart. Sailors very often added a seizing on top of it for good measure, a seizing being a tight binding of light twine around the standing part. When the one thing holding you off the rocks is a single knot, you learn to check it twice and sleep better for it. Number 9. The figure 8. This is the most humble knot on the entire list, and it was built to do exactly one job and nothing more. It stops the bitter end of a rope from running clean out through a block or an eye and vanishing where you cannot reach it. You make a simple loop, pass the end behind and back down through it, and you have a fat little stopper that will not pull free and, unlike a plain overhand knot, will not weld itself shut so hard under load that you must cut it away. Every line that must never be allowed to escape gets one tied in its tail. Small job, no drama at all, and it never once let me down in 30 years. Number 10. The timber hitch. Now we come right back home to the shop, because this is the very hitch the shipwrights use to haul heavy spars and green logs, and it is a genuine gift to any woodworker moving big stock all alone. You take one turn around the timber, then tuck the working end back around its own standing part 3 or 4 honest times, and the instant you begin to pull, those wraps bite deep into the grain and simply will not let go of the wood. Ease off the strain, and the whole thing falls open in your hand like it was never there. I have dragged rough oak beams, the full length of my yard, on nothing more than this one hitch and a slow and steady pull. Number 11. The marlin spike hitch. Here is where a plain rope quietly turns into a machine. You slip a marlin spike, which is a smooth, tapered iron, through a loop in the line to make yourself a temporary handle, and all of a sudden, you can haul with your whole back and both arms without the thin cord slicing into your palms. That handle hands you purchase, purchase being the mechanical gain you get when a lever and a rope agree to work together against a load. Riggers used it to sweat a line bar tight, tighter than any bare hand could ever manage. Any of you who has ever fought and lost to a lashing, you could not quite cinch, nose in your bones, exactly why this small trick earned its long keep. Number 12. The monkey's fist. I told you we would circle back to this one, and here we finally are. This is barely a knot at all in the loop and hitch sense you have been picturing all along. It is a heavy, woven ball tied right into the very end of a light line, and its whole reason for living was to carry weight so that a sailor could hurl the line clean across a stretch of open water to another vessel or a waiting dock. 3 sets of turns woven snug around each other, sometimes with a smooth stone or a lead ball buried at the heart of it, and you had a fist you could heave 40 feet straight into a headwind. And here is the part folks never stop to think about. That one thrown line is how every mooring, every tow, and every rescue at sea actually began, because before the great heavy hawser can ever be passed across, some sailor first had to throw something small and heavy over the gap. No proud loop on this list ever mattered half as much as the humble fist that started the whole exchange. Now, for the last 3, and these are not knots at all in the way you have been picturing them. These are splices, the permanent joins a sailor patiently worked into the very body of the rope, back when a knot was understood to be only ever a temporary promise. Old Tom kept a worn copy of Clifford Ashley's Book of Knots on his bench, and he told me the splices were the part that separated a real rope hand from a passenger. Number 13, the eye splice. Instead of tying a loop that weakens the line and might one day shake itself free, you unlay the 3 strands at the rope's end and tuck them back into the standing part, weaving in a fixed eye that is nearly as strong as the rope ever was when whole. You open the tight strands with a fid, which is a smooth, tapered spike of hardwood, and you tuck each strand over one and under the next, over one and under the next, until the eye sets firm. A properly spliced eye can carry the full working load of the line. A knotted loop, however neat, never quite can. Number 14, the short splice. When 2 ropes had to become 1 rope and stay that way forever, a sailor married the strands of both together, tucking each rope's strands down into the other and in both directions at once. It makes the single strongest join there is, stronger than any bend you could ever tie in a hurry, but it leaves the rope noticeably thicker right at the join, so it could never run through the tight sheave of a block. For standing rigging that only had to hold and never had to pass through a pulley, this was the honest and permanent answer. Number 15, the long splice. And this, at last, is the clever one, the direct answer to that very problem. When a join absolutely had to stay slender enough to run smooth through a block, a sailor would unlay a long stretch of both ropes and patiently replace one strand with another, tucking so cunningly that the finished rope kept very nearly its original thickness the whole way down its length. It was slow to work, and it asked for real skill and real patience, but a well-laid long splice would run through a sheave as though the rope had never been cut in the first place. That, to me, is the true mark of the old craft. You mend a broken thing so completely and so quietly that the repair itself all but disappears from sight. So, there they all are, 15 separate tools hiding inside one plain length of rope, and every single one of them was shaped by a real problem that a real crew faced with the cold sea doing its level best to take everything they owned. And here is what strikes me most, standing in my own shop all these long years later. Not one of these knots ever needed a factory, or a steel fastener, or a single drop of anything from a plastic bottle. They are pure knowledge, handed carefully from one warm hand to the next, exactly the same way a good and honest joint is passed down. A ratchet strap will fail you on the cold morning its plastic finally gives up the ghost. A knot tied by a sailor who truly understood it will outlast the very hand that tied it, and the knowledge of it outlasts the sailor himself. That right there is the whole reason I keep doing this work. The wood remembers, and the rope remembers too, if only somebody still bothers to sit down and learn its old language. Tom Prewitt has been gone a good few years now, but I tied a bowline this very morning, and his hands were in mine while I did it. That is what these 15 knots really are. They are a way for a good sailor who is long gone to still reach out and hold something fast for you today. If you are tired of joints that quit on you after a few winters, that old way of building lives inside secrets of the shipyard, my 150-page guide to Viking and naval carpentry, with joints that tighten with age, and 3 full projects built without screws or glue. The link is waiting in the description below. And for more ocean-tested, centuries-lasting woodworking, subscribe to the Master Shipwright.